Hello, and welcome to the Art of Engineering podcast. I'm your host, Chad Harden, structural engineer with Michael Baker International, and chair of the ASCE Orange County Structural Engineering Institute. You can visit us online at www.taepodcast.com. This show explores the evolution of a career in engineering and also promotes engineering outreach and STEM and STEAM in schools. On that note, to celebrate the intersection of science and art, this week I'm talking with David Peterson, who is a language creator and author. He's the author of the book The Art of Language Invention and has invented a number of languages for HBO's Game of Thrones, NBC's Emerald City, and movies such as Marvel's Thor: The Dark World. I got the chance to interview David at one of my favorite restaurants, and so here we go. Welcome to the Art of Engineering podcast. The goal of this podcast is to promote STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. And along those lines, I have David Peterson with The Art of Language Invention. So thank you, David.
Thanks for having me.
The Art of Language Invention is a book that you wrote, and it's basically been, as I've been reading a little bit about you, a kind of a lifelong pursuit of language invention. So,
more like a career-long pursuit, I guess. You know, I didn't really start this until college. Before then, you know, I had a few interactions with language, but for some reason it never hit. You know, it never occurred to me that somebody could create a language. It never grabbed me until college when I finally put all the pieces together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess it's kind of funny the way I found out about you. It's kind of a funny story. We have this microphone that I'm using, the blue microphone.
Yeah.
And I was going to Washington D.C. for a conference, and actually got stopped in the airport, for security because it's such an odd-looking microphone. We're looking at it as like it's a blue sphere. And after this whole trip, I had to pull it out and tell them what it was, and they were interested in it. But it reminded me, it looks like the thermal detonator from The Return of the Jedi.
It absolutely does.
Where Princess Leia, she ingratiates herself into Jabba the Hutt's lair with this thermal detonator, and I was wondering if anybody had found this scene especially interesting, and I was researching actually like what is it called, and I came across your website, or not under your website, it was an interview with you with PBS, and it was all about this scene and the use of this word Yoto by Princess Leia, and it has these multiple meanings. And it was so fascinating to me in that coming across your career, it seems like it combines a lot of things, like science with the sociology of how people talk, and art with probably how the words are used and symbols. And so what goes into putting a language together?
Yeah, it's a bizarre thing, because if you really break it down, you can end up with a kind of answer of, in order to create a language, you have to create the universe.
Okay.
Type of thing. So it's a question of where you want to cut off. Like, all right, are you going to assume some beings? Like, and that's usually what happens. Usually I'm working with humans.
Okay.
And so you don't have to worry about, for example, what manner of vocal apparatus the being has, if any, and if they don't, what manner of language they can use.
Okay.
And perhaps how their brain works, how their society works, why they would use language in the first place. These are all questions you have to answer if you're really starting from the ground up. But yeah, if you're assuming humans, and humans that can speak and then have, same kind of larynx that we do.
Okay.
And you can restrict yourself to the set of sounds that humans produce that are typically used in language. You can include some other ones, but it'd get bizarre. Like no language includes hand claps, and you wouldn't expect it to regularly just because it's just not convenient.
Right.
So the hard science of it is usually figuring out the phonetics, and it's precisely what sounds you're using, and then how those sounds work acoustically. Because when it comes to evolving a language, the acoustics of the language often contribute to sound change.
Okay.
That is, it's possible to produce any number of distinctions, but it's much more difficult to hear those distinctions consistently. And so if you mishear them enough, that can actually lead to a sound change. getting a little off track, but I'll give you an example. Let's say that you had something like September, that word, September. It's got a P and a T between the first and second syllable there. And that can easily be misheard as September.
Right.
That is a double T. And that type of change happens a lot in the world's languages. That is, there's nothing wrong and there's nothing difficult about pronouncing PT in that environment. Plenty of languages do it. But every so often, if it's misheard enough, it will be changed into a double of the following consonant. Not the first one,
Oh, okay.
but the following one. And that, in fact, happens in Italian. And so you see things like, in October, the Italian is ottobre.
Okay.
Double T. And so, so this is all acoustics. It's all acoustics, and you need to know that in order to be able to do the thing. So anyway, you create the sound system of language, then you have to work with the grammar. Grammar is a great thing because in human systems, if you think about syntax with regard to programming, there's kind of a hard pass-fail thing there. That is, at the end of your program, if you hit compile and it doesn't work, it'll tell you that it failed, and it'll crash. That's not how human language works.
Right.
Human language never fails, really.
That's true.
You always have a human there that's going to try to get as much as possible out of what you give them.
Okay.
And they can be pretty flexible.
Right.
So it's not as if, just a nice example of a grammar rule. You say something like, he's eating fish, right? You say he is eating fish. You don't say he are eating fish.
Right.
Right? But every so often, somebody will screw up and say that.
Okay.
And it's not as if somebody saying he are eating fish is just so incomprehensible that you can't recover any meaning at all from it.
That's true.
And it just crashes. I mean, that's something a computer would do.
Right.
But humans can roll with that. And so that makes grammar very interesting. Grammar is often redundant. Ridiculously redundant.
Oh, okay.
And it's often kind of solves the same problem in multiple different ways. And then it also doesn't really matter if you do it all the time or not.
Okay.
It's just, for the most part, this is what most people do most of the time.
Okay.
And so as a language creator, that's what you're designing. You're not designing a pristine system.
Right.
If you design a pristine system, what you're designing is a non-human system, a non-natural system. So when you're designing a natural system, you have to take all that into account in order to produce something that is believable, that is authentic, that you don't look at it and say, well, this is just basically Esperanto, this is fake.
Right.
So there's a lot of science that goes into it, but then also a lot of art that goes into designing the system. And then, that's just the grammar.
Yeah. I wonder if that's probably a challenge for artificial intelligence, right? For something to learn what the context is and still get the meaning out of it, like you're saying.
Oh, yeah. I really doubt that you could ever produce an artificial intelligence that's human-like. I'm sure that you can produce an artificial intelligence that's good enough.
Yeah.
But, it'd be the type of thing like Ask Jeeves. And it's, you throw into Ask Jeeves, how you living?
Right.
And unless it's pre-programmed, that specific expression, it'll, start pulling things up like, here are ways that people live. Here's a link to rentals in your area. And it's like, well, okay, you got something, but you didn't get it.
Right.
So computers are going to do that, and they're good at that. They're good at trying to pick up little context and give it back to you, but they're not flexible the way that a human brain is. And I doubt that artificial intelligence could ever be like that, but it's not as if that's important. They can do other things. They have a unique and different type of intelligence.
Right. So how many? I would imagine that with developing languages, you must first have to get really good at having different languages in your head. How many languages do you speak?
Just a couple. I mean, you study a bunch of languages, but really the only ones I'd ever feel comfortable speaking are English and Spanish. If I'm going to another country, I can prep myself. If there are languages I've studied, like Arabic or Russian or German, or French, I could probably get up with that.
Okay.
And get good enough to where I could function in a country. If I just had like a week or so to prep.
Right.
But aside from that, no. Now when I study languages, I study them for the grammar.
Okay.
I study them like the way that you'd study blueprints. So it's not like if you look at a set of blueprints, you have a new building. It's like just knowing you kind of know how it works.
Right.
Same thing with language.
Okay. How does the symbology of the wording come into play? I know you worked on or developed several languages for the Game of Thrones and Thor. How does the symbology? How do you come up with that? And how does that work into the language?
Okay, how do you mean?
Well, I guess as somebody who doesn't understand how to create a language, I'm just imagining the symbol of a letter, I guess.
You mean the visual form?
Yeah, the visual form.
Oh yeah. If it's just if it doesn't have a special written form like Dothraki, then I use the simplest possible regular romanization system. That is something that hopefully an English speaker would be able to look at, and even if they don't know how to pronounce it right away, with just minimal adjustments, they can think, okay, that's that. So every letter's always pronounced the same way, and there's never any diacritics, and there's no stupid stuff like using the letter Q for cha or anything. There's nothing like that. Just basic, very simple, what an English speaker would expect and be able to deal with.
Okay.
And that's just because the only important part there is that they be able to read it and pronounce it. That's it. And nothing else matters. When you're designing your own writing system that's actually going to be used, that's a different matter. I mentioned how with evolving language, you have to start. You go back and there's just innumerable variables. There are far fewer variables for writing systems. That is, it is within the capability of a human to evolve an entire writing system from the beginning and do every single step. And it doesn't take that long, comparatively speaking, especially compared to a language where there's no way you can do every step, and it would take more than your entire life to do it. A writing system is a very small system, and you can do it. And basically, you just start off with how iconography, I guess, began. People sketching images of things.
Okay.
And then the slow process of mapping that onto words. And then it's a bit of imaginative history of then how it happened from there. There are a couple of driving forces in the evolution of an orthography. One is moving one system from one language to another that's unrelated. That's how we got an abjad from the Phoenician. And then another is changing the writing implement or changing the writing surface.
Oh, okay.
So we went from very simple but very recognizable line drawings of pictures to, in cuneiform, a bunch of things that are unrecognizable, these little triangle stamps. But that was because they were using a reed that ends in a triangle shape, and they were punching it into wet clay.
Right.
So it made sense to do that and not to trace stuff into this wet clay. That would take too long and it would be too imprecise. And so what they were doing was trying to replicate those pictures using these stamps, and the stamp that had a very particular shape. Okay. So you're not going to get anything that looks like a picture, but you're going to get something that is distinguishable, so that the symbols can be distinguished from one another, and that was all that's important. And then from that point, that was where things just started getting very, very different. So that's what you do when you're creating a writing system. In order to evolve the visual form of the glyphs, you start as far back as you're willing to go, and you evolve it forward based on the imagined evolution of those people and the implements that they use, and then the languages that pass through them or that the writing system was passed to. When it comes to spelling, that's a different thing. It's a different thing. So obviously there's no concept of spelling when it's just basic pictures. But the second you start to involve any type of phonetic element, that's where spelling becomes important. Starting as far back as Middle Egyptian, they had plenty of glyphs that were just simple pictures, but that system was augmented by two separate phonetic systems. One that was an abjad, which was just consonantal glyphs, so a glyph that stands for a consonant, and another that was glyphs that stood in place for series of consonants, either 2, 3, or sometimes 4 consonants. So then what you have in Middle Egyptian is, an entire word where it might start with a symbolic glyph, but then it adds phonetic glyphs to remind you how the symbolic glyph is pronounced.
Okay.
So you don't actually pronounce them, they're just there. So.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, like you could see a thing where there'd be like a picture of a rabbit, followed by two, they're rivers, I guess, 2 little rivers underneath. The rivers are from the Abjadic script, and they stand for the sound N.
Okay.
But the rabbit itself is pronounced WNN, Wennen. But it's not like you look at that and say Wennen. It's like no. The double N is just there to remind you how the rabbit is pronounced.
Okay.
Right. And so that's kind of the way it works. And then there were glyphs at the end that were pictures that just remind you what the word meant. They weren't even pronounced.
Okay.
And so its spelling system was actually rather complex, even though it had simple pictures that were used in some case.
That's like the repetition you were mentioning.
Yeah. Now, as that evolves forward, another fun trick with writing systems, and this happened with English, is that the writing system itself is standardized at a time when the language is pronounced differently. And this is why you have things like night spelled Knight.
Right.
So at that point in time, there was like no standard, and people just spelled things how they were pronounced, and which is why you get a bunch of different kinds of spellings. But then at some point in time, where there's like an academy, they say, all right, and there's the printing press, both just by de facto and also with some level of standardization, regular spellings come into being. Both because, like, if everybody's spelling it the same, then you can recognize it, and also because there are people saying, this is how this is spelled from now on.
Okay.
And it happens in schools. They teach you how to spell in that way. So at that point, though, if the language changes how it's pronounced, and the spelling doesn't keep up with it, that's when you're left with all of these old archaic spellings.
Okay.
And so when you're creating a writing system, you can decide, am I going to have a more innovative writing system like Spanish is, or I'm going to have a more conservative writing system like English is.
Okay.
In which case, you actually have to write down what all the spellings are and figure them out. And like a nice example are 2 languages that I did from Defiance. One of them, the Raytheon, has an innovative spelling system. It changes as things are pronounced. There are a couple little wrinkles you have to learn. Just like in Spanish, you have to learn that H is never pronounced, but you have to write it sometimes. And in Mexican Spanish, the double L and the Y are pronounced exactly the same.
Right.
So there are a couple wrinkles like that. But otherwise, very straightforward, very simple. Whereas Castellan, it's actually a little bit more difficult than English.
Okay.
There's a lot of old spellings that are in there, and also just a lot of plain irregularities, so that when I would be using it and I would show the art department how to spell things, I'd have to spend a lot of time looking up how things are spelled, even if I knew what the word was. I'd have to go and look up what the spelling was to make sure I got it right. So that's how that works.
Okay, well, welcome back. I just have a few more questions here. First of all, I guess I was interested in how do different languages, I guess spoken languages, change the way people think, or do they? Like Chinese versus English versus other languages.
you'll hear a lot of stuff. Most of it is complete and total. So, for example, you'll hear that one of the popular claims right now that in Chinese there's no future tense, and so they don't save money as well as people who speak English, which is just. There are so many things wrong with that statement that it's impossible to even engage with. Even if you were to find, let's say that was true. They just look at everybody's savings account in the United States and Britain and India and Australia and Canada and every other place where English is the main language.
Right.
I mean, God, the thinking that didn't go into this is just astounding. But anyway, let's say you did that. You compared it to everybody in China, and it turns out that the English speakers save a little bit more money. Attributing that to language at all is first ridiculous. Second, attributing it to the notion that there's no future tense is nonsensical, because if you're going to say that, for example, that Mandarin Chinese has no future tense, then you must also say that English doesn't have a future tense also.
Okay.
Because in truth, English only has two tenses. It has non-past and past. That is eat and ate.
Okay.
That's all it has. Everything else is done with auxiliaries.
Okay.
So what we call like a future tense, it's just using will or going to with an infinitive.
Okay.
And so here's the thing. If you're willing to say that that is a future tense, then Chinese too has a future tense because it does it with auxiliaries.
Okay. Interesting.
It's absolutely senseless. It's the level of incompetence that led to this bizarre, perplexing conclusion.
Okay. I don't know even where I heard of that, but it was something curious to me. And
I did a TED Talk.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a popular notion that the language we speak is going to determine how we think, but it really is just silly.
Right.
Either that or so trivial as to not be worth commenting on.
Okay.
That is trying to think of what an appreciable difference is. I don't know. Maybe that. I mean, just to give you an example, in English we have a word corner. That just means whatever it means, right? In Spanish, there's two equivalents to this. There's rincón and esquina. And the way it works is that basically that over there is a rincón.
Okay.
Inside corner.
Okay.
Esquina is like that.
Oh, okay.
Outside corner.
Right.
So, does that mean that Spanish speakers are better able to manage corners than English speakers, or
That's true.
understand more about them intuitively? Right. It's just stupid. It's stupid.
Okay.
Anyway, and even if it were true, it's so trivial that it's just
right.
I mean, we obviously do fine with corners, with our simple little word for corner. So what's even
very
the point?
interesting?
Yeah.
Good point.
Anyway, so the simple answer is no. The more difficult answer is yes. And here are the studies that show very trivial effects that don't actually impact daily life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about? And this is probably a weird question, but in common or more pop culture, I guess people using symbols in their names. Is that of any interest to you? Like Kesha?
Are people doing that?
Probably like Kesha has like the @ symbol or pound symbol or more like singers.
It was a money sign, wasn't it?
Oh, is it? Yeah, you're probably right. Is that interesting to a language developer like you?
Not especially.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Like one of the ones I remember is the movie Seven, which I never wanted to see and still haven't seen. Using a 7 instead of a V, it's like, all right, whatever. It's
Okay.
like, you look at it, you get it, it's fine.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't really say anything deep or important about language, though. It's just a stylistic variant and orthographic trick.
Right.
It's cute.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. what kind of art do you enjoy in your own life? Either related to language or just on your own?
Music.
Music, okay.
Is the most important thing to me. Beyond anything else, I guess family and friends are first,
Right.
and then music, and then after that my health.
Sure.
I mean, unless like it's my health vis-a-vis my ability to listen to more music. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I listen to lots of everything.
What kind of genres?
Everything, like everything that we've been listening to here, I listen to.
Okay.
I listen to classical. I love West African music. I love Kagwale, and what else? Like everything, like classic rock, progressive rock. Big into metal. Yeah, actually, like the next concerts I'm going to see, I'm really excited about. Next weekend, so a week from Saturday, we're going to the Grove of Anaheim to see Nightwish as the headliner, which, I mean, don't let them know, but I'm not as excited about that. But supporting them is Delane, whom I saw when they were supporting Sonata Arctica at the Grove before and was totally blown away by it. I was like, this band is incredible. And then, so it was going to be Nightwish and then Delane. And then Sonata Arctica was added to the bill.
Okay.
Which was, another headliner and also one of my favorite Finnish metal bands. And so I was like, oh my god.
Wow.
Can't wait for this. And it's like, then you get to basically just, check a box off and say, all right, I've seen Nightwish. The deal with them is, I mean, they had a truly amazing, truly incredible, captivating singer, Tarja, who they basically kind of unceremoniously kicked out of the group because the male songwriter thought he was, hot, and they haven't been the same ever since. But they're still important in the history of Finnish metal music, so I'll give them a shot. But and then after that, I'm seeing Dream Theater, who are supporting, or promoting their new album, The Astonishing, which has some really good music on it, but it's such a wild and goofy idea that you can't even criticize it. It's like, all right, they did it. It's it's a progressive rock, double CD rock opera about a futuristic Earth where an authoritarian government has banned music, and it's about a guy who rediscovers the power of music and is going to use it to overthrow the government.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, it's it just went for it, and I'm like, all right, I'm there with you, boys.
Yeah,
let's see what you can do. So that's what I'm singing next. But I would actually love to. It's not going to happen because I have a trip to Poland, and I'm going to be on the airplane. But Eleni Mandel is playing in LA as well at McCabe's Guitar Store, and I just love her music.
Okay.
My goodness. Eleni Mandel is probably the best artist to come out of LA since Guns N' Roses. She does mainly kind of lounge music. She was initially, you could tell she was very much inspired by Tom Waits.
Okay.
And her career has kind of evolved. She's so good. I never understood why she didn't get really, really famous. Probably the most famous she's ever been is a song of hers. She did a cover of I Love Paris for a Carl's Jr. commercial featuring Paris Hilton.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it's kind of funny. Her cover, like, I don't know why she did this, but she basically, the cover goes from like lounge music to jazz to punk rock to alternative rock to cabaret to something you'd expect to hear on the Haunted Mansion.
Oh, wow.
All in the same song. I don't know why she did it. Maybe it was just for fun because she could, but...
I'll have to check that out. That sounds really cool.
Anyway, so music, but then, also, fiction. That was my thing. I went to school as an English major.
Okay, right.
So, my favorite time period was 19th century Russian literature.
Okay.
That was my favorite. But, I also like the early modern stuff, so like 1900 or 1930 or 40 in America primarily. Though, if I had to pick a favorite, it'd be Virginia Woolf, who I think is the best writer, period. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I have one question from Instagram. Do you know about the history of languages and how they were invented?
Yeah, well, up to an extent. I mean, the thing is, we only can surmise about what we have records for, and then once we have those records, we can go a little bit further with the comparative method, which is in historical linguistics how we've hypothesized that there was one language that gave birth to, Latin, Greek, German, Russian, Persian, called Proto-Indo-European. We hypothesized that this language must have existed, and we have reconstructed what a lot of the words are and what some of the grammar must have been. But even so, language itself must have emerged thousands of years before Proto-Indo-European.
Okay.
And the thing is that comparative method is only going to take you so far, because we only have written records going back a fraction of the time of human language use history, and certainly there are no oral records still hanging around.
That's right.
And since language has changed so much, it's like once you get to a certain point, you can just say that's it. We can't go. We can go further back if we want to try, but it's so speculative that nobody is going to say that there's even a 1% chance that this is true.
Okay.
So yeah, like we can go back to things like Proto-Indo-European and certain big languages like that, and figure out the history of language from that point forwards with increasing levels of accuracy as we get closer to the present. Beyond that, it is completely dark and opaque, and we'll never know. We can only really just speculate and hypothesize how language first emerged, ever. Some have used different types of evidence to suggest a hypothesis that, the Chomskyan tradition thinks that there's a universal grammar that's in all our heads, and all languages are just, variations of it. Others have used Pidgin and Creole languages to hypothesize what the birth of language might look like, and others have done the same thing with sign language. But again, it's just hypothesis that can never be confirmed unless, the rest of science, starts getting going on this time travel thing.
Right.
It'd be really helpful for us linguists.
Right. Okay.
Actually, we're not responsible for that.
Right.
So, just chop chop.
Who studies like the early languages that you? Because I had never heard of that. It sounds really fascinating.
It's a subfield called historical linguistics.
Okay.
So it's not in vogue.
Okay.
And it hasn't been in vogue really since Chomsky came to power in the 1950s. Since then, the entire field has swung sharply towards theoretical linguistics.
Okay.
So syntax and semantics, phonology.
What would you apply theoretical linguistics to?
The teasing out this idea that what universal grammar is by studying languages and figuring out what the commonality is, and figuring out how syntax works. There have these pet theories about different types of syntaxes. Right now, minimalism is in vogue, called the minimalist program, and then also theoretical is phonology. So in linguistics, I guess I should define this. In linguistics, when we say theoretical, what we mean is positing what is going on in the brain. So with instrumentation like we're using right now with Audacity, you can measure the speech stream and say very precisely exactly what's happening given the instruments we have. Mm-hmm. And then we can say, look, there are the stops, there are the vowels, here's how the volume works, here's how the intonation works. You can say that. But for the theoretical mechanism, I'll give you one example from English. We have a letter P that we understand as being a P. And we understand that sound being present in the word for pie and the word for spy.
Okay.
But they're two different sounds,
right.
In fact.
Okay.
Pie, if you put your, as really an audio technician will tell you, if you put your hand in front of your mouth, pie is accompanied by a large puff of air. Okay. And it's one of the tough things when you're recording somebody to make sure that those puff of airs don't screw everything up.
Oh, really?
In the recording. Because, it causes
Right.
causes the waveform to go nuts, and it might cause clipping. So you have to do things to minimize that puff of air.
Okay.
This is why you have things like those little screens in front of the microphone, why they put the little fuzzy things over them.
Oh, wow.
To kind of deaden that. And then in the word for spy, the P does not have that puff of air at all.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
But ask any English speaker and they'll tell you that it's the same sound.
Okay.
So, theoretically, in linguistics, we posit there is one sound in the mind of English speakers and that it has different realizations based on the environment.
Okay.
But obviously that's nothing we can prove, so it's theory.
Oh, wow.
It's basic phoneme theory, and it's what phonology does to figure out, like, here are the sounds that people actually produce in a sentence, but here's what they think that they're actually saying.
Okay.
And then here are the rules how they get from that mental representation to what they actually say.
Okay.
All right. So that's what I mean when I say theoretical linguistics, as opposed to like phonetics, which is very much a hard science that works with data and instrumentation.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'd never ever heard of that concept before. That's amazing. Okay, this is a good question. So this is from elementary school. Why doesn't everybody speak the same language?
Oh, because they haven't.
Because they what?
Because they never have.
Right.
That's
Okay.
That's the reason. They don't speak the same language because they never have before.
Okay.
And so, languages naturally drift apart, and that was easier to see in the olden days. Now with the internet, you can communicate with any person on the planet instantly whenever you want. But back then, if you if a group of people sailed from one continent to another, there's a good chance you're never going to see those people again.
Okay.
And so because languages naturally change over the course of time, if you have two separated speaker communities, they will naturally change in different ways.
Okay.
If they do that enough, they'll become different languages. Related languages, but different languages. So this is why we have Spanish and Italian and French. All obviously related, all different.
Do you think with the advancement of communication, will there ever be one language merging together?
I'm not sure, but we are losing languages like one a week.
Really?
No, it's got to be more than that. Maybe it's like 10 a week or something.
Are you serious? I can't imagine that many languages being around.
Yeah, there's about 7,000, or there was. That number is rapidly dwindling. Now, I will say that at the beginning of this century, they hypothesized that 90% of the languages would be gone by 2100. Now they're saying like 60%, so that's good. That is good, but nevertheless, no, the languages are rapidly disappearing.
Okay.
And there's honestly precious little you can do to stop it, because it's one thing for a linguist to identify a language that has a couple hundred speakers left whose population is dwindling. It's quite another thing to then go to those people and say, you have to keep speaking this language, because most of the time the language disappears because there's another bigger language, and it's the people who speak those languages that have the economic opportunities.
Okay.
So if you want to get a job and provide for your family, you have to speak that language. Hard sell to go to that community and say you have to keep speaking your native language when they just don't see economic value in it.
Okay.
And it really is economic value.
Right.
Because it's great to have intrinsic value, but when your choice is literally starving or not, you don't worry about the intrinsic value of your unique cultural artifact, which is what language is. You worry about providing for yourself and your family.
Okay.
So that's it's a linguistic problem, but the solution to it is not a linguistic solution. It's something that linguists can certainly help with and inform, and they can give you the tools and talk about what it means and all that, but it has to be a societal solution to preserving indigenous languages. And it also has to come from within the community as well. So anyway, it could happen that down the line that if society keeps up and there's no huge nuclear holocaust or something, that eventually we're speaking all the same language. It might happen. More likely that we keep 20 or 30 major ones.
Okay.
Because unless it becomes really, unless physical travel becomes a lot easier.
Right.
Because even though we say you can communicate with anybody over distances at any point in time, like most of the time you just hang around at home,
Right.
talk to people who speak your language in your immediate area, like most of the time.
Right.
So unless we develop transporters like in Star Trek, and you can literally live anywhere and go anywhere instantly, then maybe we'll see more of a homogenization of language.
Well, thank you. This has been extremely fascinating for me. A lot of things I've never even thought of before, or thought about before. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Always fun to talk about language.
We've been talking with David Peterson. He's the author of The Art of Language Invention, which is out now, and a language creator for numerous shows and films. You can find more about David and his work at www.artoflanguageinvention.com. Thanks again, David.
Thanks for having me.